why you got in philosophy and what philosophy was like in the 60s when you started, kind of why Hegel
It's
of
it's a,
all people
it's
at that time?
it's I can tell a story about that that's kind of interesting. In in uh, in high school, um, I got really interested in math and physics, and so and I also took a fair number of advanced placement courses, and ended up arriving at Williams College with more advanced placement than anybody had ever arrived with. So they accelerated me into the sophomore physics course, which was a course called Electricity and Magnetism. And the text we used for the course was written by our professor. So the sad side of it is that I really did have quite an ambition to be a mathematical physicist, but I wouldn't really want to do it unless, I could compete with Galileo. So I was very ambitious about studying physics. But then what happened was, being the only freshman in this class of 40 people, say 30 of them sophomores and the other 10 juniors and seniors. The way Williams worked was that all of the freshmen lived in one quadrangle, the freshman quad, and then almost all the upperclassmen would be in fraternities. So I'll come back to that point. I went to this very difficult course on electricity and magnetism, where the text was written by our professor. And because of that contingency, that sort of odd feature, all of the problem sets, at the end of each chapter that would be assigned as our homework assignments, all of those problem sets had been worked out over the years. And in every fraternity, there was a file cabinet with all of the answers to all of the questions. Well, so it turns out that I am the only one in the whole course who is doing all of the homework assignments from scratch, and everybody else seemed to be having such an easy time doing them that the professor just kept piling on the assignments more and more. Well, then finally we had a midterm exam where I made a mistake in the coverage of the exam. I thought it was like from page 1 to 70 or 1 to 8, but in fact, the coverage was another 3 pages in which there was an elaborate 3-page derivation of the formulas for a galvanometer. And since I had simply not looked at those pages, and that question was about a third of the exam, well, I almost flunked the exam. I mean, I got all the other questions right, but that one, just not knowing what it was, I got a very bad grade. And that really knocked me for a loop, because again, I thought, gee, if I can't beat Galileo, I'm not going to do this thing, and I'm not going to succeed well at this with this kind of start. And so spring vacation, I took the time off to do a lot of reading and asking myself, is it really metaphysics? Is it really physics I'm interested in, or isn't it metaphysics? And so once I figured that out, that it really was more metaphysics, I decided to take a year off from college and read my way essentially through the history of philosophy, just to convince myself, gee, if you had majored in physics, you would have had a gainful career as an engineer somewhere. But philosophy, my God, all you can do is grow a long white beard and live in a cave. I mean, so I decided I really wanted to understand whether my interest in philosophy would be sustained. Well, the result of that was that, well, by the time I got back to college to take the introductory philosophy course, I had read more philosophy than some of my professors, and from there on out, it was so easy for me. I mean, I was always first in my class, both at Williams undergraduate and Yale graduate school. And then when I was my third year of graduate school, I got a Danforth fellowship, a Fulbright fellowship, and I went to Germany to learn German so I could study Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and Heidegger in the original. And so I was just always kind of way ahead of my peers, which made it fun. But the interest began, as I say, with a disappointment with physics, a questioning, is it metaphysics I'm interested in? And then spending a year reading to try to answer that question. I mean, I read a lot of Plato, a lot of Aristotle, Berkeley, Locke, Hume, some Kant. Kant is so hard to read on your own. I didn't even try Hegel that year, but I read a lot of Nietzsche. And it really was sustaining my interest. I was fascinated.
And were there, as you were reading all of this stuff, were there particular philosophers like maybe Nietzsche or particular ideas that really kind of grabbed you or grabbed your interest?
Yes, yes. And I'm a little bit surprised in retrospect that the first philosopher I would say I really fell in love with, I just became utterly absorbed, was Spinoza. Odd choice. But I think it was kind of, the format of his ethics. There's principles and definitions, and then almost geometric proofs.
Right.
Part of my fascination with Spinoza was a kind of a remaining positivism from my time of being so interested in physics. In my early years, and I think this is actually true of a number of people. I wrote a few notes about it in the last part of my new book. It's interesting to me that positivism, the idea that the world is deterministic, and that if we gather enough facts, we can predict the future and know everything there is to be known. Well, I really kind of embraced that, and so I was interested in early Wittgenstein, the Tractatus, and Hans Reichenbach, and a philosopher of science named Morgenau. So I studied all that pretty hard. For a number of years, I was really a logical positivist, but I grew out of that, as I think many people do. I think there's no better critique of early Wittgenstein than late Wittgenstein. I may have used this image before to explain something else. I've used it recently, I'm not sure with you, but for logical positivists, the kind of common sense model of the world is a pool table. But I think for people who get more mature and who discover how hard it is to know things, the model of the cosmos is a swamp. A lot messier. Well, one of the things that I tried to do in the Terry Dennen talks, and not Dennen, Terry Deacon talks. You've read enough of his stuff to know how important the word constraint is for him. And I think it's necessary to really kind of do a metaphysics of Terry Deacon's world. He's begun to do that with Ty Cashman, but I've tried to work out a sort of series of columns. You put causality at the top of one and constraint at the other. And then what corresponding concepts are there in that schema? And I think you come to see that the world just isn't the kind of place where the principle of sufficient reason holds. But for Spinoza, it did. So I really made a turn in that respect.
You remember like what made you make that turn? Was there some particular philosopher or experience or something that?
You know, I don't remember a specific turning point or a specific author. It was, and I actually think in the end of the section I maybe have sent you on chapters 5 and 6, that were parts 5 and 6 that were not part of 4 and 5 that were not part of the original 3. I have a little section that I call the turn. You know, I think Wittgenstein made the turn, yeah, you become, when you learn, like Socrates, your ignorance, you gain a certain humility that I think is necessary when it comes to understanding the world. So part of the horror of our current politics, I think, is people being way too sure of themselves